Hello, good night, everybody. I'm Laura Netz. I'm here presenting ArtFutura 2021 edition for London. I will be introducing tonight artists Nicola Plan, James Edward Marks, and Chris Speed. The panel discussion is about virtual reality, and I just want to put a frame of this panel discussion, and I'm referring here to the recently published book Technocrats of Imagination, where Ryan Bishop writes about how defense suppliers are adopting virtual reality technologies to cut costs. And my question for the artist tonight is around this matter, how the links between high technology and military research have boosted the digital revolution, and how can art become beneficial for the development of VR. So with this framework or this context, I want to introduce Nicola. Nicola Plan is a movement artist, coder, and researcher with a PhD in media art and technology at the School of Electronic Engineering and Computer Science at Queen Mary, University of London. After Nicola, James Edwards Mark will present his experimental and mixed media. He's an award-winning social video for Good Pioneer, multidimensional electronic artainment, chatter, curator, creator, and provocateur. And we have also Chris Speed's work that is exploring themes of duality, embodiment, and abstraction. And he will be presenting after the talk his performance, Mutable VR. So I'll pass now on to Nicola, and she will start her presentation. Thank you very much, all.
Thank you.
Okay, I hope you can see that. Right, so yes, so I am an artist and researcher. I'm working in new media, especially in virtual reality. My main interest is movement and empathy, and I seem to have quite naturally fallen into looking at expression and communication from a post-phenomenological standpoint. So that for me means that once we understand our own perception, our external world, as it was, we will have more of an understanding of this world. But also that movement plays an important part of our world explorations and our experience. So to move is to express ourselves, but also as a sense perception of the physical matter that's around us. So all of my work asks this question: what is it that we're experiencing? And I think that movement has an important aspect to explore there. So we cannot move or act in the world without understanding ourselves as like an embodied being. And our experience of embodiment extends beyond inhabiting the body to an experience of the body within its environment. Yes, so I have a PhD in empathy, intersubjectivity, and nonverbal communication. So I actually looked at how people understood one another for that research, both in terms of what we tell each other, how we empathize with each other, but also how we conceptualize another person at all. All within this framework of our body language. So my artwork explores this question in a very research-based form. So each piece is like an experiment to me. The viewer is the subjects, and I just want to see how people respond as an insight into my research questions. So historically, I've worked in all sorts of movement sensors, electronics, motion capture systems, and I was using the Kinect with one of the really early Oculus Rifts in 2015. And I was intrigued to see how audiences took to the movement interaction so well. And all of the people using the piece, they had like a sense of play, a sense of improvisation, and a real exploration when they were using these sort of movement interactions in virtual reality. So this is the first artwork that I'll talk about, Sentient Flux, from 2015. So Sentient Flux is a movement-based interactive virtual reality artwork. It's a collaboration with artist Alexandra back in 2015. To interact with the work, the users perform expressive gestures as an exploratory act, almost like a search for sentience in the virtual environment. Users interact with these glowing particles. So at this particular beach, the sea lit up with phosphorescent plankton, and which were agitated by movement, and then they sort of glow more. So the piece questions how these particles might interactively move with the user or with our audience, and how the audience responds to these movements. So they're moving with each other, and they're usually responding by dancing with these particles. And I like to think that there was some sort of sympathetic connection between the particles and the audiences here. So do the particles exhibit an awareness of the user? Is there a sense of empathy there? What qualities of the movement performed by the particles actually show a sentience? And what is it about the movement that gives the particles a sense of being a thing? So the reactive particles, they're not based on any sort of body language or any other observed human behavior. They are quite linear, but they're generated using the human user's body as like a repellent or attractive forces. And then there was almost an illusion of interaction from that. So the particles have a 3D awareness of where the user's body is in local space. And this is from a depth map in the real world, which is detected by a Kinect camera. And this gives like an artificial view of the user's body. And then there's a small amount of turbulence. I'll play this again. There was a small amount of turbulence added to the movements. And the idea behind that was to give the particles a sense of their own volition. And even though it was all computer generated stuff, it seemed to give like quite a compelling sense that the particles held a sentience and that they were attempting to dance back with the user. So the particles embodiment is only available as like the particles themselves, and they only appear via the movement. So it doesn't necessarily have a form that you're looking at when you're interacting with this work. So what resulted was a feedback loop of expressive movement. The users moves with the particles, and the particles give the illusion of interacting back. So what's interesting for this stuff is how it actually has a sense of presence in virtual reality. So so this is the environment made in Blender, I believe. And so from academic research into virtual reality, I'm just going to keep playing this video. There's this professor called Mel Slater, and he looks at presence in virtual reality and says that it must give the illusion of free phenomena. So place, so that you're looking around in the same way as you can normally. There are sort of objects in the world that you would normally see. There's the plausibility illusion, which is like where if you stand in the virtual environment, it will kind of respond to you in a way that real objects do. And the more our interaction with the virtual things is like our interaction with the real things, the more they feel like they're real. And the last thing is that having a body. So the sense of having a body in the immersive experience is also how the real world responds back to you. And it's also very dependent on movement itself. So to have a strong sense of presence, users need compelling ways of movement interaction that engage the whole body. And so this work was directly looking at this phenomenon, and particularly in virtual reality. So considering Laura's question about this, how art helps to develop VR as a technology, so works exploring these phenomena will give an insight into how to present VR experiences, and also how to think about how all of these illusions are important for training simulations or scenarios that you might find. Okay. So the next work that I'm going to talk about is parallax. So parallax has quite a similar setup, but it adds another person to the mix, and it explores empathy between two audience members rather than the user and the computer. So these are sort of based on exploratory questions about empathy and expressivity, and the question behind it is, how do we know that a movement is a human movement? What does it mean? What does the human element come from? And what movement quality is that? And also, can you see it from in a different form? So this one is set up so that you are inside. Here we go. So you are inside a tunnel, and all you can see inside the tunnel is this moving image in front of you, and it sort of undulates in a very sort of computer-like way. There's not really any sort of expression except for like these moving things. And behind it, you will see the Sri symbol, which is I think it's a symbol for human energy or something like this. So it's a little bit of symbolism in the work. And so the idea is that this shape in front of you has its own rhythm, but once you start moving around, you can start seeing, am I controlling this? But maybe you're not, because it has its own base undulating rhythm, but then also all of your movements are added into that as well. So it's like, can you see it? Were you able to experience that? So this sort of generative shape amplifies the expression onto the base rhythm, and then the difference between the procedurally generated flow and the human expression is what I wanted to see whether people could detect. Okay. And in this one, you didn't necessarily have a body. So actually this view, it's not the best view here, but you're looking at your feet and then you're looking at your hands. And every time you move, you get these sort of lines come around you. And you can also see this happening on the other side of the shape. So you can see that there's somebody else in there. Your view is directed down the tunnel to see this other shape. And the idea is to see whether you can see if both of your expressions are being imposed onto this shape in the middle, and whether or not you will interact with each other, where you will make some sort of improvisation with the movement or something like this. So that was the experiment behind this one. And so all of this work is a question, and I create these works in order to answer them. And the way that I do that is essentially just by watching people interacting with it, what people seem to think is happening, and I never really know what the answer will be here. So here is this Shirancha symbol that was made very crudely in Blender and stuck onto the edges. And the idea was that you had to walk towards it or walk away from it, but that it was a very focusing symbol. And I also collaborated with producer Metalog to do the sounds, and we did like a surround sounds, which was sort of moving along with the movement of the sphere in the middle that has a bass rhythm. Okay, right. So yeah, you'll notice that that was in 2019. So for the past couple of years, I've been working on a research project at Goldsmiths Computing Department in London with colleagues from University of the Arts London, University of York and Coventry University. So it's like a collaborative research project. So we're building machine learning software. And this particular one is a plugin for Unity. Unity is the software that I used to build these previous works that I've just showed. And it allows for users to use machine learning algorithms to design movement interaction in virtual reality. So for example, a movement would be recorded by our system and then put into the machine learning training set. And then when the user runs the algorithm, it should recognize the recorded movements, and then it will do whatever the developer wants it to do. So we are designing this software for artists, but we're also particularly interested in working with choreographers and dancers to be able to use it without a background in programming. So the main control system is in the form of a node-based graph, so that you can see that behind there. And I mean, if you're interested to use it, we've got a website, interactml.com. And yeah, so you have this graph, but the main idea behind this project is to be able to use machine learning inside virtual reality and to be able to use it with movement interactions themselves. The most interesting concept to come out of this project for me personally is thinking about how the machine understands movement, and in contrast to how we as embodied things, people, understand movement. So the machine learning software we're building relies on breaking the movement down into different features. So the movement features are computationally characterized relative to a set of dimensions in space and also time. So the features that we use are, for example, position, rotation, velocities, and that's sort of numerical format. Different types of movement, they might be predominantly characterized by different features. For example, a twisting movement would be characterized by a rotation feature, for example, or a movement with a clear trajectory from one point to another. That would probably be more characterized by position. So I've actually spent quite a lot of time thinking about how to visualize in virtual reality these numerical values, so that describe the movement to a human. So obviously the machine, you train your machine learning algorithm with certain movement features, but how do you understand what you've recorded? How do these numbers translate into actual movement themselves? So how do you translate the numerical form into something which is conceivable by a human? And also vice versa, how do you turn a movement into something that a machine would understand? Also, how do you understand what the machine understands? So this project is also interesting on an ethical standpoint because the technique behind the research is interactive machine learning. And that is essentially that the developer or the user has control over the training set. And funnily enough, the smaller the training set, then the better that it seems to work, which is almost the opposite with a lot of other machine learning systems, which have massive training sets, and there's lots of ethical problems from that because you're storing lots of people's data, etc., etc. But in this system, you add your own movements, you refine them, you can delete them. They exist in a closed system. So the ethical issues passed on to its users and how they use the tool in their work. So we don't hold any training sets of movement data. but what our user does is entirely up to them. Yeah. So anyway, wanted to share a few things out of that research project, but if you want to know more, then you can look at our website, interactmod.com. Yeah, so that's pretty much everything that I wanted to say about VR and art. And that's my details again. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you very much. It was impressive. It's very nice to hear that we have this ethical machine learning going on with all these issues of climate change and all the, we know all the issues that carries on with machine learning and neural networks, all the high consumption of energy and the CO2 that is producing now in this massive investment of data training and machine learning. But well, that's not the that's not the issue for tonight. So we are investigating a little bit about VR content in art and this context of, I just want to remember that VR technology was originally from NASA, military department in the US. So, well, my perspective is more materialist on technology, and I'm much more of a critical position on how to use tech and if it's really open source as a solution to the big five. But now I'm going to pass the words to James, and he's going to introduce his work. So James, welcome tonight.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Laura. And yeah, amazing work, Nicola. And I'm going to be actually streaming through the Connect, which you were talking about, but the new Connect. So yeah, in cyberspace right now. So I'm just going to share the screen. Can you see that okay? So I wanted to start with, I think it's been 30 ArtFuturas, and somebody we've been inspired from the past is Timothy Leary, and everybody knows his kind of famous 60s kind of beat to, you know, tune in, drop out. But actually that originally came from him talking to Marshall McLuhan. And Marshall McLuhan famously said, electric circuitry has overthrown the regime, time and space. And we've definitely seen that recently, especially through lockdown. And so some of the stuff I'm going to talk about is touch on, you know, how funding, you know, most things at the moment in the arts are being funded by governments. And we're probably in a similar situation now to what would be considered like a warlike situation. And a lot of innovation is done during war times. And you know, and a lot of innovations now recently, the technology we're using here, Microsoft. So Microsoft had just done $1 billion deal with the military. So this is where it's kind of being reversed, and they've had a headset like the HoloLens and Kinects, and they've then sold the technology to the military now. So yeah, I think it's always kind of interconnected. So I'm going to show a little short trailer from a sci-fi project we did. It's where we met Laura. She came to No Boundaries, Modern Panic, and it's How to Operate Your Mind. It's a remix by Stephen E. Dynard. He's one of the sci-fi artists that we collaborate with. And it's a famous film that you can find on YouTube, but we've kind of remixed it. It's in 360, but this is just the 2D trailer.
You might catch yourself sliding in and out of a Just relax and enjoy it. Just relax and enjoy it.
This is an experiment in mind formation, the language of form. We will create a language of international, global brain link-up. Anyone in any culture watching this screen will get the general picture. Divinity lies within.
So Timothy Leary, you know, was definitely a provocateur. And he kind of influenced a lot of our work. One of the first experiences I created with some developers, We Are Formation. was called Hack the Planet. It kind of combined YouTubers, hackers, the film hackers, and a composer friend, Simon Boswell, who did the soundtrack to Jodorowsky, Hardware, and he worked with Timothy Leary and did a track called One Brain about how we're all connected, the universe, the cosmos, and the neurons. So we made the first ever Google Cardboard. It was just as Android had done the first phone. Unity was around, so you could create these new experiences in virtual reality. And it was the first live concert VR Google Cardboard experience. And at the time, not many people had the technology. So, and one of the things that I'd created at this time was something to explain the music of Simon Boswell. So I picked this word called sci-fi that was supposed to celebrate psychedelia and science fiction. And then later I discovered that in a J.G. Ballard interview article, he actually used the word as well. And it was this word, he said that the 20th century, the two most underappreciated art forms were surrealism and science fiction. And I think now we really truly are. I think even MIT set experiments for their students to come up with ideas that are taken from science fiction. And this is kind of happening all the time. And so we also set up with Hack the Planet. We saw that a lot of the VR events were really, really corporate. And so we decided to put on our own event called Hackstock with Sci-Fi London. And it was free for artists. And we collaborated with a lot of Nicola's kind of friends that would have been part of, like Maria Kometica, and people that were part of the Trampery. So we were like into looking at immersive. And we kind of look at VR, but there's also mixed reality, augmented reality. And we've kind of started to call this now multi-dimensional motion arts to get away from, a lot of the buzzwords, which now, people are calling extended reality. So I think it was just kind of, we tried to focus on the art form of this multi-dimensional technology. And so this is the kind of style of the events we do. This is a kind of Hackstock theme, no boundaries. So you can see lots of different things, projection mapping going on. We got a projector called Broomex. That's a 360 projector where you don't need a VR headset. So kind of playing around with lots of different technologies. And Google Cardboard has always been our kind of go-to kind of experience, even though some people think it's a rubbish experience. It's just that it's really accessible. You're using your phone. A lot of the time we use second-hand phones bought from, we've been doing festivals like Boomtown. I'm working with different artists. So this is an image from Batuan. He's like Mr. Cyber Rabbit and Cyberdelic Mushroom. So working with different artists all the time.
A world first, I think. We've made an app.
Wanted to put together an experience that was looking at a lot of the new stuff that's the buzzword virtual reality. And we wanted to tap into as well science fiction, science fact, social good, and from that kind of create an event, an experience, and bring a lot of people together.
So kind of Hack the Planet ended up, that was made over 5 years ago, but it's still, available on the download store, Play and Apple, and we've shown it to hundreds of thousands of people. Even taken it to the Museum of the Moving Image. Won a few awards. So it was definitely something, experiment. You had to take a virtual pill, and then we had different artists, different songs. And at the first live gig, we used a Timothy Leary track, and you took the cardboard and then took the pill at the same time as the music started. And so a lot of this, going back to Laura's question. That's Ada Lovelace. Google, they powered a lot of the stuff, from my early days of, searching to find people who to talk to if we're looking to raise money, to then YouTube. So YouTube 360 started around the same time as the Android phones and Unity, where you could make for multiple devices. And now they've also been a pioneer in AI, Tiltbrush, which now they've made open source. So the work I'm in at the moment is drawn in Tiltbrush by Laura Inman for a project I'll show a bit further on. And so Ada Lovelace worked for and wrote the first algorithm program, and she was working for Babbage, and I think he got his money from the government to make the first computer, and that would have been in the 1800s. So yeah, I mean, governments have always been funding this technology that then gets into our pockets or into our front rooms. And so also, like I said, science fiction, and so the image on the left is actually a kind of copy from an image from a book called The Electric Circuit, which was written by the guy who wrote Wizard of Oz, Baum, I think his name is. And so he imagined a pair of magical spectacles where you could mix content, multi-dimensional content in front of your eyes. And so this was like a year after Wizard of Oz. And so people have always been imagining this technology, but now the military are going to be using these magical spectacles made by Microsoft.
Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllables of recorded time, and all our yesterdays of lighted fools.
So that's Marlon Brando, and I only discovered this a few years ago in the documentary Listen to Me, Marlon, and he was a pioneer of this multi-dimensional motion art technology. He invested millions and millions of pounds of it in the 80s, and in the 90s that was a capture of him in regards to making a short film that he wanted to do. He hated acting, and he thought that he could create himself as a 3D Marlon Brando. He used to get paid 10 million quid, films like Superman, and he thought he could make money as Marlon Brando, the cyber artist. So you never would have imagined where some of this funding comes from. So it's also been coming from artists who have made money, as well as from other organizations. And now this is another thing which comes from ArtFutura, which we touched on earlier, Timothy Leary, and he said, who controls the screen controls reality, therefore it behoves you to control your own reality screens. And so more and more, like Nicola touched on, this thing about data, when we sign up, the algorithms that are feeding us content. So the content you absorb, I mean, personally, we don't work with Facebook or Oculus, but we do work with Microsoft. So try to, we all have different points of view of what technology we should be working with. But I think more and more people will make decisions based on the technologies they want to work on, ethically, environmentally, and that will come more into our thinking. And so we ended up forming Play Labs. So Play Labs is based at Ravensbourne University. We've been there for 5 years. We experiment in multi-dimensional motion arts. We've done thousands of projects with the students, and it's formed with Marius Matteson, who I met. He was studying there. He's a theatre and an amazing coder. And a lot of this stuff, it's all about the code and the vision. But if you're a coder and you an artist, then it's even more incredible the stuff you can make. And so some of our partners are like Sci-Fi London, Ecology. We started to plant a few trees because we know, even though I'm in a cyber sugarcane plantation, we're not doing a lot of good as well with this technology. People like Mondo 2000, some of our heroes we work with, Third Mind, People Speak, Holotronica, who do the big festivals, or Beyonce concerts for holograms. And Subpack. So we work very closely with Snoops and Subpack in regards to being able to feel music while you're in multi-dimensional virtual experiences. This is one, it's super DIY. It was made with some of the students at Ravensbourne, and it was Statue of V at the launch of Extinction Rebellion. So it was just some nice timing with the very lo-fi DIY multi-dimensional capture using Connects and then the Magic Leap headset.
Monuments, statues, They are forged to remind us of the past. A past where women were a threat. A past where peacemakers were dangerous. A past where heroes were villains. But what could inspire us to take control of our future? Voila! A reminder that we, the people, will always prevail. Remember that from now on, every day.
And that was super DIY, made just as the headset came out. And we've kind of always focused on trying to work as well, not just with the students and the neurodiverse minds. We work with the SEEDS program. And it seems to be, some of the research shows that a neurodiverse mind thinks more multidimensionally, and some research from Imperial. So any kind of virtual technology is going to be really powerful from regards to the artworks they can make. So this was probably one of our biggest projects. It was for London Design Festival with an incredible artist, Rachel Ara. I'd been to a talk at the Lumen Prize, and she said how, exploitative working with male technology companies it could be. And so we talked about if we could work differently, and this was made when we were part of Double Me. We had the Hollow Portal at the V&A, and it was a very, very powerful project. I think Rachel hacked into the CCTV. We had real-time holoportation, and you had to be there. And it was about how the nuns had been exploited in the times of Venice and stuff like that. So it also fits very nicely now with some of the other stories that are going on. So all the nuns, they were captured volumetrically and then placed. Marius had scanned the actual Renaissance chapel taken from Italy, so it's the only one outside of Italy. So, and basically, and then you actually had to be there to be part of this multi-dimensional experience, and it had audio that told you the narrative inside the headset, and lots of other objects that were fake narratives. So so lots of different things going on. And then one of the things we decided to do as part of Play Labs, we wanted to make Genimo, which is a software which I'm in right now, which is going to be a free application tool that anybody can use using multidimensional sensors, and then put you inside the virtual artworks. And so we launched Genimo earlier last year. We got a little bit of money from the Innovate UK, which is government funding. It was the fast track, and we're about to finish that this year. So this is a little bit of Genimo in action.
Line those signs up in our video.
So we've been working as well with Luciana Hale. She's been our artist in residence for Genimo. And then as well, last year we were approached by GIS, which is the educational technology provider for higher education. And we used Genimo with Holotronica to create 8-meter high holographic genies of yourself at DigiFest, and I think last week it was kind of in the Experience Awards, and this was done on a very, DIY. Most of the stuff we do is DIY, low budget, but the theme was very sci-fi, so we felt it was something that we could get involved in. And we also, working with the Magic Leap, it also works in HoloLens. It also works on a volumetric display called the Looking Glass. We've also got our own little holographic projector, so you can project it turning on your mobile phone, like Pepper Go style. So we're kind of always experimenting with different kind of ways of experiencing multi-dimensional content. And so this is our latest work. I think it's one of our most complex, and we've used GDMO. It's telling the story of Gurmit, which is Gurmitiers, and how the colonial times from India, how they were taken to places like Fiji and the Caribbean to grow sugarcane for the British Empire. And so this was a retelling of the story. It's a virtual artwork drawn in tilt brush by Lorna Inman, produced for Nutcut. And this is AJ inside Gurmit, and we launched it at MozFest, because MozFest is all about an open and fair internet, which is something we're very jacked into ourselves about. How can everybody have access, because there is a digital divide between some of this technology we're doing. That's why we still like cardboard.
Welcome to the world of Nutcut and Gurmit. Gurmit is a project that came to life during the pandemic and lockdown. Launched at the first ever virtual MozFest, the Web for All, and created with artists across the world using the internet and experimenting with different digital and heritage forms. And finally, to be inside the artwork by being inside the Gurmit experience allows all of the multi-dimensional aspects of the project to come to life. Nutcut, working in partnership with Playlabs to create Gurmit, has been an exciting journey as one of the first projects to access 4D technology using GDMO and using a...
And so we also got to go to Kew Gardens, and you may have seen that on the news recently, the whole, retelling counter narratives of the colonial times of things like even plants. So sugarcane, this is actually the sonic wavelength of the sugarcane plant, which you get to feel inside the subpack while you're inside the immersive experience. And we've also developed a one-dimensional comic book, so you get some of the other narrative elements that go with inside the very poetic, working with Sharma Rahman and Snooks with the score, and to make a multi-dimensional experience and learn something at the same time. And that's down at Kew with the subpack on, feeling and listening to the music. And then also, once again, that's Luciana using GDMO at MozFest for the MozFest after party inside her own brainwaves while playing music, which this will premiere at EVA this year as a paper that we've been supporting with Nick Lambert from Ravensbourne Research. And then finally, this is just us playing around. This is Luciana, I think from Nampak. He said he was a communications artist. So this is us just playing around, in each of us in GDMO with a Google Cardboard. Well, actually, this went live last week with Maria. So we've been working with Maria on her Transcendence project. When it was at Rich Mix, we filmed it, captured it in 360. And then we also did it at Waterman's. We captured it in 360, and it premiered as part of the Reclaimed exhibition last week. You can go and experience it if you go to the Art Influx website. Just a little peek here. So this was shot in an afternoon on a 4K, very small VR 360 camera. And then Marius has stitched this together, and I think it's also got an immersive sonic score. Yeah, so that's all, folks, from me. And yeah, and like I said, a lot of this work is all available. Most of the stuff we do, it's always free. You know, it's the way we kind of like to get the art out there. But yeah, no, it's been great to for being here, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you, James. It's very nice to have you. I just want to highlight two aspects of your work. I think it's very important to address this issue of the Planet Laboratory and how to hack this Planet Laboratory through DIYing technocultural apparatus. I think this is a very strong position, proposing radical art and technology against the new ideas of digital corporativism and capitalism surveillance. So now I want to introduce the next speaker and artist performing tonight, Chris Speed. He's presenting Mutable VR, and I'll let him talk next. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have a presentation prepared though, but I'm sure the performance will speak for itself. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you can explain a little bit how is mainly how is the setup, which technologies you use, or you know how is your setup working, which are your how is it composed?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so yeah, similarly, I've been using the HTC Vive, and yeah, I started with the cardboard, like most people. It's the first one. You don't want to take too much of a financial risk when you first start getting into VR, and there is like a massive issue with accessibility in terms of you know, you need like a really, like, that computer's super powerful, and you need like a good like graphics card and like a Vive, whatever. But then I kind of eventually like I was doing my masters at Goldsmiths as well, similar to what Nicola's doing, but I was in the same department. My master's was in computational arts, so we started with like kind of more graphics programming languages like open frameworks and processing, and eventually I went more and more into like audio, because my background was as a DJ as well as a VJ, so I wanted to get more into producing, but I kind of wanted to go under the hood of that, so I got really into like Maximus P, because my DAW of choice, my digital audio workstation of choice, was Ableton, so I wanted to start making my own devices and my own tools from that. So, and then I kind of went back, then I remember years ago I saw a performance by Ash Kusha at the ICA, and I remember thinking like, this must have been back in like 2015 or something like that, and I was quite inspired by that. I thought, you know, like, it's actually quite a powerful, virtual reality is quite a powerful medium, and I was already sort of doing a lot of work at the time with like, because my background was originally in film, but I kind of moved more into like motion graphics and as well as electronic music. So yeah, and I thought, you know, we're already doing all this stuff on the course of learning 3D graphics, and, you know, sort of how to generate our own tools in C++ and Python and Java and JavaScript, etc., and Max for sound. So I thought, like, I kind of want to take it to the next dimension and sort of learn how to like sort of create like 3D environments. And it's quite, you know, I do like a lot of programming in 2 dimensions, so when you see it on a screen, it's very different to how it actually appears when you're actually in VR, and it's quite like an amazing experience when you actually see it, but then it's never quite what you expect, and you have to tweak things. But the way the performance works tonight is, so originally it was for my masters, it was for my the computational arts final degree show, and originally it was performed in this place called the Symbol Space in Goldsmiths, which is like a it has like 6 projectors and like a ambisonic sound system, and I was outputting from my computer to all 6 projectors. No, sorry, I think it was all 3 projectors, and the sound was like coming out, and it was like an ambisonic So I was using Max and this like program called Spat, which is like made by the French company IRCAM, to sort of to create like spatial audio like scenes basically. So like you had 8 channels, because like with like music production, you never really want your bass and your kick to really move around. So your bass and kick are kind of like the sort of low end sounds are kind of like a pretty static, but then the high end and mid frequencies are all moving around in this sort of virtual. So me and a friend sort of made like a virtual environment of a virtual sort of simulation in audio terms of the space that we were performing in, the ambisonic space. So we could sort of we placed an omnidirectional microphone in the middle of the space, and then measured like the distances between the middle of the microphone, because an omnidirectional microphone picks up sound in like in a 360 kind of way. So we had that in the middle of the space, and then each of the speakers were all around it. So we could then send like signals, and then the delay between that signal and the microphone, we'd be able to calculate in Max exactly where them speakers are. So we had like a perfect acoustic model of that space. So we was able to get all 8. So I had like an 8-channel performance that was, the audio was scripted in terms of using like just basic math functions like sine waves and random functions and Perlin noise functions to kind of move the sound around in sort of like quite a chaotic way, except like the low end, as I was saying. Like the low end is pretty static, but that's because it's like more like, so we had like a sub in that space, and the sub like would just be like the sort of the underlayer to the whole thing. But the high frequency and mid frequency stuff moves around quite a lot. And then in terms of like the graphics of it, it was all done in Unity. So because I kind of had like almost like a baptism by fire by learning how to sort of program in C++, so like sort of using more open source tools. So we had to learn how to build that from scratch, and then eventually Unity is actually like for me, I was able to pick up quite easily. Because a lot of the stuff, even if it's open source, it kind of it's like a good balance of like being open source in terms of it can be downloaded, but also has like the sort of benefits of a proprietary GUI, like a user interface. So you could you can go as deep or as like simple as you want. And so I learned all this stuff, like really advanced stuff, like compute shaders and like how to sort of script particle systems to do like really crazy things. But in the end, I settled on this tool called VFX Graph, and the thing about Unity, for my years of like developing with Unity since graduating from Goldsmiths, it's impossible to keep up with. It's like a constant rat race because they're constantly innovating and adding stuff, and it's great. But at the same time, like something else that you've been working on, your code will no longer be it'll be useless in like a year. So you have to kind of keep up with it. But at that time, I was making this project because originally I was making this other project which is based around like Jungian psychology, because I did a module Goldsmiths that was based entirely around virtual reality, and I did this project similar to Nicola's that had like a Connect. And it was like based around sort of like Jungian psychology and sort of also a bit of Freud in terms of like the mirror stage, but also like the project was based around Animus and Anima sort of, and I think it was called like Animus VR, and that was kind of like an early prototype of this. That was like an early sort of prototype of what has evolved to this. So it was kind of, this project's actually gone through 3 iterations, and like the first time I made this, I started experimenting with like using Max and Unity together. I sort of connected them for his protocol, which is similar to like MIDI, which is like a lot of keyboards, and sort of when you have keyboards that, like for playing, it's kind of a standard that was been around forever since like the 80s, and it's a standard for playing keyboards in like digital indoors and stuff, in digital audio workstations, and for making music. You can also use it as a way of networking like old synthesizers to your computer and whatnot. But then OSC is like kind of like the next step of that, and that's still quite a few years old. But like rather than 127 integer values, it has like, I think it's like 20. I can't remember exactly the number, but it's got like a really wide range of floats. So it works really well for like gestural kind of things. So I was using the Kinect, and I had this kind of like 3D representation of like how, so it's like I was trying to sort of do this hacky way of doing like immersive, what's known as like embodiment in VR. So when you look down, you have a sense that because you know you can make like a VR world, and you look around and you sort of see this like 360 space. But then the next step of that evolution is being able to look down and see your hands, and it kind of really does add to like the sense of this being like you're actually like in that world. And really, it's like it adds to, as Nicola was saying, like the plausibility illusion. So, but I thought like the way I did it was kind of a bit like tricky, because it was like a Kinect, and I had to kind of slice the head off a 3D model and it kind of have it like sort of being puppeted by yourself, and then sort of turn it around. So it was like you were seeing like a like similar to Nicker's project, where you're seeing like a version of yourself in front of you, and you could sort of like mimic the movements and stuff, but also that it was like inverted and it was below you. So, but the project, yeah, Connect was like, for me, because the Connect is like now very, very old, and very quickly that piece of software, that library I was using for Unity, like became useless. So I moved to Leap Motion because I think I saw Marshmallow Laser Feast's We Live in the Ocean of Air, and I saw loads of similar projects in around, I think it was 2019 or something like that. And a lot of people started using the Leap Motion, so you could tape the Leap Motion to the end of the HTC Vive, and then there's an SDK you could get for Unity for like tracking Leap Motion hands. So then like it was kind of like trying to stick these two bits of software together. So I already had this sort of, oh yeah, and also like I was also doing like a lot of like shader displacement, and so I was using like I already knew, I do know how to program in like GOSL and HOSL and stuff like that, but once again Unity started like to move more to this other programming language called Shader Graph, which was like kind of similar to Max or Pure Data or one of these other programming languages, like visual programming languages, where you can patch things together. But it was like entirely for creating sort of effects on 3D models and like vertex displacement and like sort of fragment effects. And then the next evolution of that, so Unity then developed this thing called VFX Graph, which was like another similar node-based thing, but entirely for compute shaders, which are like shaders that you can use not just for rendering geometry. Well, they're actually not really used for rendering geometry. They're used for like outsourcing computation. So if you have like a really highly task that needs like a lot of computation, so like if for instance particle systems, where you want to generate and emit loads and loads of particle systems and do sort of all kinds of like things with them, like make vector fields and stuff, you can use like a compute shader to outsource a lot of that, because most particle systems in most 3D programs use the CPU, and when you get to like over like 10,000 1,000 particles, you really start to get a bottleneck. So I started using compute shaders, and then I was able to get these incredible sort of like, when you start getting to millions of particles. So this project tonight is using like something like 10 million particles. And my graphics card will be like going crazy. And it gets, yeah, you could cook an egg on my computer. That's how hot it gets. But it's using like all these, once you start to get a form of like emergence, when you start reaching them huge numbers but applying simple mathematical rules like Perlin noise, or like when you have that amount of stuff, like that amount of content, that amount of geometry to play with, you start to get these insane like sort of like complex forms. So it kind of looks like flocking behaviors that you see in like birds, when they all sort of like, you know, when you have thousands of birds all sort of flocking around to like follow a certain way. So yeah, it was kind of inspired. Yeah, and so technically that's where I'm at over that kind of stuff. And then so like this version I'm playing, so that was the first iteration at Goldsmiths, was the one that was in that space, and I had like the Leap Motion and the particle systems all sort of moving around. And also when you look at your hands, your sort of hands are comprised of particles, and I was kind of I was really inspired by like quantum physics, and I was reading a lot of like Karen Barrod at the time, and yeah, like the idea of like having matter being sort of like, you're kind of comprised of matter, and we kind of forget that, but then we're actually on the same kind of like wavelength in some ways as like other elements in the universe. So it was kind of like the idea of like stripping that away, so you can see yourself in like kind of this pure form, which is like particle, that we're all made of particles and atoms and stuff like that. And I was sort of going on this sort of like almost cosmological sort of idea, and then like by looking in sort of inner space. But then like with this new project, I wanted to like expand it out, and it was more like I kind of inverted the system flow of how I'd programmed Max and Unity, so that Max was, rather than your OSC, like using OSC to like, so your movements in from the HTC Vive controller was like I was using my body and my gestures and stuff to like control like parameters of the sounds. So whether my arms were like make a filter sort of like sweep, so like modulating a filter, or it was like, you know, I was modulating distortion with my hands and bit crushing effects and stuff. I kind of inverted that now. So now I built like it's really simple, like really actually quite prehistoric AI in Max, this like idea known as like Markov chains, which is like a way of like it's another like sort of generative music method that goes back years, that sort of goes back to like Xenakis and stuff like that. And it's like the idea that you can have like, you can train like a really basic model of like using like a certain amount of notes, so you can, or like, you know, a certain musical phrase, and then you have like third and fourth and like first and second and third order Markov models, so it can like then sort of based upon that data then generate new stuff. And you give it quite a small data set normally, so I'm only training it, so all the notes and the sort of way I composed all the MIDI information in my last performance, I've now retrained the AI to do the sort of simple Max AI Markov chain stuff to like generate new stuff. So now that it's kind of like the Max project kind of controls itself. I'm not really doing anything anymore, and the Max project kind of all the stuff happening in Max MSP is now was controlling the stuff in Unity. So I'm just like kind of moving around particles really and sort of just dancing with it. So like in terms of what Karen Bauer talks about, like agency and all this kind of stuff, I like the idea of like sort of playing around with like sometimes the laptop's the performer, sometimes I'm the performer. Yeah.
Nice, very very amazing. Well, let's enjoy a little bit of quantum physics, a little bit of diffraction in Karen Barrett as well. I want to thank you, IKLECTIK. I want to thank you, ArtFutura, and I want to thank you, all audiences. Just remind you that we have more Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Tomorrow we are with the Music Hack Space, and Saturday and Sunday with Watermans. So thank you very much, and please stay and enjoy quantum physics, Mutable VR, Chris Speed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great presentations, everyone.